Las Vegas wind. Side out with the pavements for you. Anyway, so I'm not the person who you want to listen to it every place, but I am Keith Friedman. I am accused of being a non-fan, starting off as a very non-fan in 1957 and not going to the Kettering convention that year and not going to the first London Welcome that year, although that wasn't my fault, I was actually the other side of the world. Quite a long history with DSFA, producing or sending out fanzines, keeping the roles and so forth and so on. And of course, when did I ask? First came to Corfu, Winchester, I think, and I've been to most of them since then. The early ones, of course, I was with my wife, and it was 5 years ago now. However, that's me, which is not of any use to talk to anybody. That's what I'll get into. Right, introduce yourself, and away you go.
Okay, we're going this way. My name is Nigel Rowe, formerly of music and London. I'm here on the panel as an outsider. The reasons for me saying that will come clear a little bit later on. But I got into Fandom in 1979. I started off as a Star Trek fan. And I didn't know that I was a Star Trek fan. I just knew that I liked Star Trek. And I got through the whole phase of Red Hot Heinlein, stupid audiobooks through libraries as I was going through schooling. I wrote off to the Star Trek welcome saying, can you connect me to other Star Trek fans in New Zealand? They connected me up with somebody, I wrote to that person, they said, hey, you should go off to the local science fiction club. That's how I switched from the Star Trek fan to the science fiction. It's been all down since then. So that's my initial backstory. I moved to Chicago like 30 odd years ago. That's where my outsider started.
Hello, my name is Alan Rosenthal. I encountered Fandom in Toronto in 1978. I attended an OSFIC meeting at the suggestion of a friend who had been invited to one by another friend of his because OSFIC had absorbed a Star Trek society. And first OSFIC meeting, I met a couple of people who I didn't know, who showed me a couple of fanzines which I'd never heard of, and I'm still here. Within 3 months of attending regular meetings, I've been asked to be the secretary-treasurer of a convention. I was 15 years old. I found out later that it wasn't because I was enthusiastic, but it was because being underage, if the convention lost money, any check that I signed did not have to be honored. We made money, as I recall, after we returned the empty beer bottles. I've been in Toronto, Seattle, and I've been in Glen Ellen, California for the last 15 years. And that's my introduction.
Okay, I guess I'll go. I'm AC Kyle. Father was Dave Kyle. So as you can imagine, I've been a fan for a good long time. My first convention was probably the 1961 World Cup. Now, if this were a real science fiction world, I would have attended in Pittsburgh. But as Dr. Rob would point out, it was actually in utero. So anywhere my mother was, from February to November 1961, I was there too. My earliest memories of convention going probably Heidelberg, 1970, or maybe Oakland, 1968, actually. Here I was, a 7-year-old, looking down on the Society for Creative Anachronism people fighting. What I saw were knights in armor, with helmets and swords and shields and flying pennants. You can imagine someone like me, I was just enamored of it. But I've been a science fiction fan since my mother read The Hobbit to me when I was 5. And I've been exposed to it with my parents ever since. And I remember actually sitting around the dining room table assembling Dad's fanzines that he put together. We go around folding them, staple them. So no idea what they were. But in the 1960s, anybody knows?
Let's deal with this.
Sizzle or Suzanne Thompson, and I've been in fandom since 1967. When I went to Carnegie Mellon University, then Tech, and I went to the television room of our dorm, and there I met a woman who was in this room, Linda Bushacre. And we were there to watch Friday night to watch Star Trek. My uncle, and she introduced me to modern science fiction literature, which I had virtually no involvement. And from there, we just sort of went on. Because of Linda, I found fandom. I don't believe I would have otherwise, but perhaps I would. We started the SF Club at Carnegie Mellon, and I got first Worldcon. Linda found out about this Worldcon in 1960.
I just wasn't sure how this all works.
It's all good.
Biggest Worldcon ever, with thousands. And since then, I republished a fanzine. And Linda took that as her own. And I co-published fanzines with Madison Jerry Kaufman. Since then, things strengthened the work. And I also work as I run conventions, so I'm kind of a hybrid fanzine fan.
Now you know who we are. Now you want to know what we can talk about. Does fandoms? But the first problem is, what is fandom? And the answer is, we are corporate fandom. And there are other fandoms, Star Trek, conventions, people who've never heard of fanzines, but go to conventions, and so on and so forth. What is it about this small gathering? I'm not talking about people in the room, but everybody else, which is different and which is or does not suck. And I suppose if we started that way, we might as well go and continue the narrative.
Okay, thanks. Well, I mean, I've said this before. I received cold flu, and a lot of people in this room, in fact, a lot of people in this room, and the people that aren't in this room that still associate cold flu as being family. And unlike our real family, sometimes just family I want to come spend time with. Every time here is always Thanksgiving. It's not waiting for that to happen. Although I go to NovaCon quite often in England, so that's it. But you know, fans, also it's family, it's people I want to be with, it's people I want to hang out with, it's people I want to share history with. And that I think encapsulates a lot of what attracts me to fandom these days, is choosing to be somewhere and enjoying the people that I enjoy.
Well, I am going to agree. I'm really here today because of 2 or 3 people I met at a club meeting at the end of February 1978, who introduced me to fanzines, introduced me to some of their friends, and as I started going to conventions, warned me against going to other conventions where there were people who I would not know and who had known each other for many, many years, and I would find it hard to get into conversations with. So I went into a hotel lobby at the first MidwestCon I attended, looking around aimlessly for other people, and heard this voice behind me saying, "That looks like a sensitive Spanish face." So even when I didn't know the people who were there, if I was interested in meeting them, they were interested in meeting me. And that's been my experience in this fandom, at least for many, many years, and I hope it continues to be my experience here for many years to come.
Alan, who commented on the most sensitive fan base?
Bob Tucker.
Well, this being my first court flu, I come at this from the perspective of more of a traditional science fiction fandom, as traditional as science fiction fandom can be considered. But we're all part of one big family. And I think we're all united with certain themes an optimism, an interest in the future, desire to explore, to question, to wonder, and to have that sense of wonder. What I see in Corfu, the people represented here, is something very interesting difference with sort of mainstream science fiction fandom. That is, we go to a convention, we attend parties, we have talks, and talk into the night. But that's ephemeral. The conversation is done, you have a good memory. That's really all it is. Of course, everything in this world is ephemeral, everything will disappear, but with science fiction fandom, you produce and share a written word which will last, we hope, far beyond everyone in this room. And you can actually share a heritage, a history, ideas and philosophies with other people whom you've never met, never will meet, but can actually participate in a way with your experiences and events at conventions, about books and magazines and your travels and so on. And I think that's very special.
Oh my, what can I add to all of this? It sounds so perfect. Among several people here, I was at the first one. I was at actually 6, and I missed a few. I've been to many of the courses. One thing, there's always a different mix of people. Some people do try to make all of them. Although that's hard. But what I'm doing is all it's being called a family reunion. And in fact, no matter who's there and who hasn't been there before, or who's been to all of them, it is a family. We get to see our friends, people we know for decades, people who are just taking time. And I think it's a very special thing. It's not going to go away as long as we know.
Okay, so that's part of it. Now let's get down to the nitty gritty. What is different about Corfu from any other band? I've got ideas, but I'm not the moderators to shut up. Oh, no, actually,
What is different about culture? I mean, you know, it's easy to state the obvious. It's shared heritage. In fact, we've been going now for 41 years, or 41 quarters. I mean, what brings us into this room today? It's more than that heritage. It's that feeling. It's the stories that we share, the parts that we have played, stories. I mean, Lee, I haven't seen Lee for, I couldn't remember, it was 89 or 85 was the last time we saw each other in Australia. And it's like, we've had a relationship, not in person, over all those years. Together, we share a lot of interests on preserving Danish history, writing Danish history, sharing those stories that we heard from other people, preserving it for, I don't say future generations. Share my experience with us now. But it's like, Lee and I could just pick up a conversation, even though we haven't seen each other for 30 years. Do you do that with people you interact with in other areas of your life, like ex-colleagues from 30 years ago, or whatever? It's a different relationship. So I think, picking on Lee again, it's like the relationship that we have is quite unique. And we all have that with all host of people, right? Point so through it. They know at what point us connect to, what we have in common, what we do. How many, I don't know if I can do that next time. What members of your family do for jobs or whatever, that's sort of common. But that's one of the things that I find that attracts people. And other some of the conventions, I'm not just going to. It's kind of our fandom, but it's not our fandom. It's fandom is part of their whole.
I was going to pick you up on that because although it's very true, it is also true with general fans. However, I'll leave you to answer my question before I ask.
So the question is, why is this fandom different from all other? Hello? My answer is I don't really think it is. I've been associated with a couple of other families that have nothing whatsoever to do with science fiction. My dad was an amateur radio operator. I kind of got sucked into that as a teenager. At the same time, I was getting involved in science fiction. Although the two areas of interest are very different, they're both based on communication and work at the speed of communication. We publish fanzines, they publish newsletters, they talk about de-expeditions, we talk about conventions. And the one thing I'd seen in the last couple of events I went to that had anything to do with amateur radio was a bunch of people bemoaning about how there wasn't anybody under 50 in the room anymore. And I don't think it's us, I don't think it's science fiction, I think we move at a slower speed now than the rest of the world does. We don't move at internet speed. And honestly, I don't think we need to change to move any quicker than we do, if that makes any sense. I don't feel that we are keeping people out by maintaining our ways, as it were. I think that if someone is interested in talking to me, I'm gonna be very interested in talking to them. And in that way, I think we have a lot of common with any other fandom and fandom adjacent group might say go to Worldcon. Sorry if my thoughts are a little bit scattered. I'm really thinking about this for very long, so maybe I have. But I don't know. I'm here because you're all here. That's about it.
Well, as I said earlier, I'm not really an expert on fanzine fan, but I see a lot of connections, of course, with what I am familiar with. I think it's probably safe to say that Sturgeon's Law probably still holds true in fanzine fandom, but the word mentioned earlier puts into perspective the word family. And when it's family, it doesn't matter if it's crud. You'll still like it, you'll still appreciate it for what it is, and still have a connection with other people. So I think that's fine. And what we mentioned earlier as well about conventions, the best conventions I ever attended have always been the smaller ones, the intimate ones, the Midwest cons, the River cons, Nova Con, even Easter Con, a little bit bigger, but still small, intimate friendship. And when you meet with people you haven't seen them for a year, you get to chat, you try all of these things. I still felt a good connection with people. And that intimacy, that feeling of family, friendship, has been lost, I think, in some of these blood. And I enjoyed experiencing that, particularly at one like this. It's intimate as it really is. It's great size to me.
There's much to
I don't see. As you say, we're gonna start with you next.
Oh, no. I'm blind, I'm sorry. I agree with everything that you said, that you're rather first thoughts. I too like in Oregon, I work on a small and most small conventions for the most part. But sometimes at the larger conventions, you're so high to meet. And you end up having sort of a convention within the convention. And so, I mean, one thing I do like about the large ones is sometimes more people can make it. Wouldn't come to a court, but we have many friends and family who are not so. You'd like to see. Yeah. Fine. You've got to make a plan, and then it will work. So I think on this board,
Julie to see, Chris. Susan would say, don't start on me first, because I'm slow think. Not that she is.
Fair.
So I will start on you first. Tell me, give me one thing that is unique. Did you hear that? She was, I know that.
well, you need to you need by unique to Corfu, you need to do something that we do at Corfu don't know what else does, or is it more just something that has become a tradition.
Something that is unique. Well, not entirely. Before
this.
Because what I've been thinking about before, when we talked about this before, was, one of the traditions that we have, starting at the very first court food, is the auction. And then in that way, and it's not unique to conventions, but the reason that the auction was started was because the convention itself was realized that they were going to be short in order to pay the hotel bill. And so we spontaneously started an auction, and zines went for enormous amount of money and other things, just to raise money to actually pay the convention. And I think it was used that way 2 times without the emergency part of it, over the years. But then it turned into raising money for various Spanish charities, I think, that, and other good works that we do. So that is not, I said, not unique to have an auction, but it is to have, I think that type of auction, we began it with the very first.
I don't think anyone else has a fanzine auction exclusive.
Thank you, yeah, thank you.
I don't know whether you want to learn that anything or not, basically, but you hardly know enough about it, to be honest. I mean, we're not really putting you on the spot. Next. Well, like I said, it does remind me very much of the smaller convention, the Wax companies, where we're there primarily to visit each other. Of course, this convention, you're united by fancies and printed word and wordsmithing and publishing and design is part of it. The limitations of some of the older technologies. But I find that intriguing and interesting.
Well, obviously, one of the most favorite things about culture is how we choose our guest partner. And I think that's across all conventions. And it's because we celebrate ourselves. We celebrate somebody who's been chosen for their past endeavors, who's been selected as the guest partner. We don't know who we're going to get. The joke always used to be in the past, the smoss of culture you get the backward. Decide whose name is going to be put out of their hat because they wanted to hear that person more than anybody else. But that's not really how it happens. Those happen like still another cultural tradition. But the fact that we don't know who we're going to get, what we're going to get, what we're going to say is like part of the magic, right? We would have had something fantastic, spontaneous guest of honor, speeches, action drama, theatre. I mean, all manner of things have been magically whisked out of somebody's hat on that Friday, and on Sunday, that's 2 days from there. I mean, when I was guest of honor 2 years ago, I kind of cheated a little bit because, like some people in this, I carried around a few notes over the years just in case this happened, and I didn't want to have interrupted my fun over the weekend. I would retreat to my room and come up with something that was mildly entertaining. So I at least had the bare bones or something that I could build upon, which kind of worked. Claire and Mark wanted to do their acting, so didn't completely suck. But I think that is something that's very, very special about culture. That's going to be true for the foreseeable future until we get to that point where there really is only one name in the hat. That person is going to be like possibly somebody who's coming to their first from the AC. So
The one person left might also have put in $20 to be removed. And I have to admit that the idea of being chosen as the guest of honor was a source of terror for many years. And then I got picked and it wasn't all that bad. But I know, to me, Corfu it's a community. It's not just a convention, and that's what's different between us and going to the World Cup, where there's certainly community there, but it's multiple communities. Here we're kind of all one, if not family, one community. We help each other out, we look after each other, and that's it's a rare thing.
We are like World Cup back when there were like a couple hundred.
That was before I was born, and I still feel like I'm a part of that.
Susan, you want to come back? No, no, look, I thought we did, sorry. Okay. Yes, Rob.
So I just wondering, do we think that the rest of Fandom sucks? Or do we want to remain in communication? Are we branches on the same tree?
Yeah, that, of course, was going to be the end question. No, you're right. I mean, if Fandom sucks, why does it suck? It does suck, why don't we suck? Does that completely confuse everybody?
Yes,
So, yeah, good. Okay. So, and what else are we going to discuss? Yes, okay, then. All right. Nigel is now going to approach into what he's been thinking about all the time.
So I started at the beginning by saying I came to this as a bit of an outsider, and I still have those beliefs. I'm actually, I didn't attend the first 5 quarters. I came along in Minneapolis, that was my first one. I was actually pretty tired because I was doing a cross-country trip my way up to New Zealand. And that year, so the convention, as much as I was so excited to actually be physically present at a Corfu, I was actually pretty exhausted from various buses and everything for the first week. So I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I was going to enjoy it. So then skip forward 3 more years. In 92, I was back doing some of the films in Australia. That was actually for a chance to get. And I purposely set it up so I'd hit Corfu 9 minutes and LA on the way, and then I was going to hit Wisconsin, and then I was going to do that with Rubicon. So it's going to be 3 conventions over a month of travel to the States. And to this day, that Corfu was actually still my favorite Corfu. So much fun. I walked into a smoking consulate, reconnected with Ted, started reconnecting with a couple of other people who I've met over the years prior to that. And it was like, that really to me was like my first Corfu, but I totally did not feel like an outsider. I felt like I immediately belonged, even though there were so many people in the room at that point I didn't know. Quite a few of them I through their fans' reputation, through reading fanzines, reading about them fanzines, but I didn't know them. Instantly felt connected, and that's been true ever since then for the other 20-odd Corfus that I've attended, for the one later ran Chicago in 2016. When I looked at the analogy is about being an outsider. When I moved at the end of '92, because I moved country once and not there twice in 1 year. And I moved to Chicago because I'd gone home to Chicago one. And I immediately felt like an outsider in Chicago because I didn't know very much about Chicago. I was at a loss when I started working there. People were talking about things. It's like I didn't really know. I didn't feel a connection. It took quite some time to actually get used to the place and to start learning the backstory and the history and jokes, why people put piles of rubbish out in the street to like preserve their parking spot over ones that full of dips. And it's like, it's over time, I overcome all of that initial reluctance. I think we see in a number of people who come into fandom, come to Corfu, they see this barrier of entry to being able to connect with us. I've seen some people who come in for a year or a couple of years, but they drift away. You haven't been able to like hold on to them. And I think to them, sometimes it's like they feel like an outsider and they haven't had that natural experience which I and many other people had their first Corfus. And I think that's always something that we focus on. We talk about it a lot. I remember conversations 30 odd years ago about what we do to attract more people. Magic. But anyway, Chicago, I initially felt like I was an outsider for several years, and then I became an insider as they talked through things. That sports, the sports backstory or teams, I think jokes, I join conversations about it. And there is this poster which I love. This poster saying why I love Chicago. And it's an 8-panel comic, and every panel is about I hate this aspect of Chicago. I hate winter. I hate the Cubs. I hate dibs. I hate the rats. I hate the rail, which is the rail which you fall on Chicago line with yourself. All these things. The 8th panel says, I fucking love this place. And that like sums it up. To point out all the things that suck and all the things that you hate. And the last thing is you encapsulated all of it. But I still love this place, and that's why I live here. That's why I keep coming back. So even the things that we hate, at the end of the day, we've done.
Okay.
Thank you. This ties in quite neatly with what Nigel said and also what Ted said before about Corfu feeling the way the world was used. We've just been having a little chat in the Discord about Corfu now feeling like a very comfortable place, whereas larger conventions do feel like a gathering of all of the fandoms, and as Susan said, in fact, a place where you can meet your other friends. And so I say this as someone who finds Corfu feels incredibly comfortable now, while also still, after all these years going back, I'm not one of the cool kids. So I wondered, given what Nigel just said, whether you think actually our problem perhaps in encouraging other people to come and to stay is that a lot of the rest of fandom thinks that we think they all do suck, that we only want this, that we look down on them.
Can I comment to that? Yes, sir.
Well, on that note, there's something that I've been thinking more and more of recently, which is that back when I was getting into fandom, there was a very strong feeling among certain parts of fandom that Spanish fans were gatekeepers. We were elitist, we were exclusive. We didn't like to sort of let new blood in. This was nonsense. And there's always been nonsense, but there was this very strong, and very hard to shift preconception of that in certain quarters. Nowadays, fandom as a whole is starting to feel the way that Spanish fandom did back then, in that the demographic is aging upwards and people are not coming in at the bottom to replace it, and that is a good or a bad thing I would volunteer to say, but it does mean that all those old parts about us being exclusive gatekeepers, you practically never hear them anymore, and oh my goodness, that's welcome.
Anyone else?
Yeah. Can I just add, I'm sorry, you're hearing me again. A historian's perspective on this, this is my first clue, and I feel like this is my first convention in many ways. But it seems to me that Cork is in fact one of the and in the fans so then we start to hold business after that. So that all the other fandoms no longer need fanzines to create that kind of community, that kind of convention environment. And what we're left with now is people who are stuck in the old ways.
And I'm happily stuck in the old ways because I'm happy with this way of communicating. But those fandoms out there, as far as I'm concerned, suck because they're not interested in the way of communicating which we're interested in communicating. They also don't have a tradition and a history that we have. You talk to a lot of modern fans, and all they're aware of is 4 or 5 conventions ago. Whereas you look over there on the tables, there's pieces of paper of call for fandom, which go back half a century. And we're aware of that century. You refer, who was this person? Well, said that's the 10th Spanish States. Tucker, everyone who's here knows who Tucker was. Go to an ordinary convention, who knows about Tucker? Who knows about Harry Warner? Who knows about Florian? Those names which have got created things. The whole fan understands it. It's just that this little group contains that memory and keeps it going through corporate. Is that enough? There you go.
I think the thing that people looking at young neo fans, people that pick up a fanzine and can't understand why there isn't more about science fiction, are always looking at us and saying, goodness, you're obsessed with the past. And I think that what the rest of fandom doesn't understand is that an understanding and appreciation of the past makes an interest in the future infinitely deeper and more rewarding. And so,
I'm binding.
yeah, okay, yes, time binding, thank you, Tim. I lost the thread there, but I think that's fundamental, that's one of the differences in that when you come into fandom, you assume you'll be talking about the future all the time. And instead you end up talking about the past about 90%.
I think you're all too nice. I think fandom does suck now. I have to have a word in for fandom sucking now. Okay, I miss the old days. I miss the early fan conventions when we would go in. And Lynn Carter would grab a bunch of people, we'd stay up all night and we'd go out to breakfast with Lynn Carter, 20 people to the nearest Chinese restaurant. I miss the fans that are gone. I miss Bob Tucker more than you could say. I miss those fans that are gone. I miss the excitement of those conventions where you went in and you found all of the famous writers that you never thought you'd ever see in your life, like Isaac Asimov. And there he was. And Ron Ellison, there was he remembered you. He barely knew me and he remembered me. I mean, I miss that excitement of convention. I miss the excitement of handing out my fanzine. I miss the excitement of me trying to sell my copy to Bob Silverberg and everybody complaining. Why are you trying to sell your fanzine to Bob Silverberg? I miss the fun, the not knowing what was going to happen. I miss the everybody sharing a room. 10 people, 5 people, suddenly trying to share a room and taking the beds apart. I miss those days. I miss fandom as it used to be. Therefore, by comparison, today's fandom sucks.
I mean, I agree. In a lot of ways, exactly. Fandom does suck. Not specifically our fandom, other fandoms suck. But one thing that I see as an interesting corollary here is that, a lot of fandom, we don't talk about science fiction, we don't necessarily talk about the future all the time. We talk a lot about the past. Also does that now? Social media. But social media and science fiction fans have quite a lot of stuff in common. There's so much ephemera in social media about what people are doing it when they do it, what they're doing, whatever. That's what a lot of stuff in fanzines was over there. I think it's really interesting that a later generation is like going through this in like more of a bite-sized format rather than like spend 3 pages talking about a convention experience. They're putting like a couple of photos up about what they ate while they're doing something somewhere at some hotel that wasn't anything to do with science fiction.
All right, well, I want to argue that no, not for me, fandom does not suck. Because I get the same things out of fandom now that I used to get when I was 20 and 30 years old. It's just that the medium has changed, you know? I used to wait by the mailbox every day to see what letters would come in and what fanzines would come in, and write letters of comment and write fanzines. And now, you know, I'm on the Truth End news group and in the bar. And, you know, we have meetings once a week. And I see my friends who I've known for 30 years. When someone publishes a fanzine, the fanzine is there on Bill Burns' site. If I look at Bill Burns' site, and on Facebook, you know, every day, you know, the same thing. People that I've known for 30 years are there, you know, telling what's happening with them on Facebook. And also, you know, I used to like to be Circon. I used to like to go to panels and, you know, talk about science fiction novels and writers. We had the Potlatch Science Fiction Convention where we did that. Now, there's a group on Facebook called the Science Fiction Book Club. And they're not our fans. Like, of all the people, and there's 1,000 people on that list, the only name that I knew before I joined was Steve Davidson. Some of you know was the current editor of Amazing. But they've read everything that we've read. And, you know, they talk about classic writers of the 40s and 50s. They talk about modern writers like Mario Wang, you know, possibly should not maybe go and didn't. And, you know, they keep track of both new and old science fiction. And, you know, someone said in the group the other day, can anyone give me a really good religious science fiction novel? I said, well, there's The Sparrow by Maria Gloria Russell. And immediately 8 people registered likes. And the moderator of the group said, great, that's going to be our book of the month for next month. And then, you know, there were a few people that said, well, you know, I was going to say Capital for legal. And then one person put in, well, you know, Arthur C. Clarke, the star. You know, they know, like us, and you know, it's fun. Someone asked me, you know, they said, well, I really like Paul Anderson. Has anybody ever met him? And, you know, I said, well, yeah, I understand how with Paul and Karen in bars, and like Paul would get drunk, and, you know, and sing the freaking song. You know, and, you know, they like that, you know, and this afternoon, someone said, I read a novel years and years ago, something about space engineers, and there was a character called Giles Hoppigan. You know, I immediately said the Legion of Space. Actually, someone else said the Legion of Space, and I said, well, yeah. And, you know, there was a companion volume called Legion of Time, and then I did the book, Alas, or Giles Hoppigan throughout the galaxy, all along the last possible planet. You know, and in this group, we can do that. They and they know. So that the same feeling that I used to have of wanting to talk about science fiction and something that I'm still able to do. I used to be very angry at the beginning of the millennium. I was really angry. You know, they've taken our convention. You know,
most of the world cons, sometimes they won't even have a fanzine lounge anymore. They don't know who we are. If you go, the fan, go to people who never heard of. And, that used to love. And, now I just feel, well, it's okay, it's their people, and they like the stuff, and they read it, they're happy. And, we have the fans. So anyway, that's my piece on why fandom doesn't suck.
Anyone else? Sorry.
And for the woman that was saying how much she misses everybody, well, there are groups, schools about that, tell us, we all do these people and love, and share that.
What you're basically saying is, fandom is what you make of it. And we all make of it what it is that we're here for. This is what binds us together and keeps us as fans. But at this point, it seems as though, well, you remember the days when it was a proud and lonely thing to be a fan? That was a long time ago now, because that was when science fiction was in a little ghetto and despised by the literati, and we felt shat upon and defensive and proud. And now science fiction is skippy, and it dominates the media. Much of TV and much of movies is skippy, and it's worldwide, and there's just tons of people who may or may not consider themselves to be fans, but it's not a proud and lonely thing anymore, except for those of us who consider ourselves the core of fandom. And we are diminishing by aging out. There aren't enough new blood coming in. There's a few, but not many. But right now, we're redefining what fandom is. We've redefined it largely by moving fanzines to social media. The E-lists have in many ways replaced APAs. And in fact, APAs are diminishing to the point where once proud FAPA has, I don't know, maybe 20 members left. It had a membership limit of 65. SAPS, the other older APA, is down to maybe a dozen people in SAPS.
Seven.
You make my point for me. So, as I say, it's what you make of it, and we're here because this is what we make.
I think simply that, when I was early in my days in the band, one of the controversies was the vision, Circon, and the band. And the band, we tended to sometimes add an extra A in there. And, well, I think the people in this room and the people like us we're now the 2A bands. And the people who are going to the modern world cons and all that kind of stuff, they can call themselves bands. I don't mind slight differentiation to keep our roots evident, at least to us.
The whole concept of fanzines. The whole concept of fanzines has been taken away from us. I mean, there are plenty of people now who talk about zines and trace their history to the 70s and rock fanzines, Xerox paste ups that people were doing that had nothing to do with SFM at all. And at one point, I believe fanzine was trademarked by an Italian company. And it's just, it's all spread out.
Right now, at MoMA, there is a zine exhibit at MoMA. And I read the write-up on it, and they talk about how starting in around 1969. and it all is the offshoot from what had been us, and that we fractured into rock band and comics band and that stuff, and then it just splintered into all the many other things. And but this exhibit at MoMA There's not a thing in it. It was in Monroe. But it's nothing before the 1970s that exists.
Brooklyn Museum of Art.
Okay, well, that's the.
Okay,
At least I
can
got
I-
the museum part right.
Everybody wait. Move in the outside.
I wanted to follow up on what Ted said, at Newcastle, when I was a Corfu 50 delegate, I wrote up a brief essay on we get the fandom we create. And I used to not really understand until I read the Futuring. It's like, there are a lot of people in fandom who seem to, really enjoy getting into great big arguments. And that's that. I finally came to accept that when I realized it's in our DNA. It goes all the way back to the beginning. But when, there's a lot of fandom, and there's certainly been a great deal of controversy lately. 2023 Chengdu, Worldcon, Hugo's, etc. But when I look at what I'm in fandom for, while I will want to talk about important things, usually what I see in the parts of fandom that I would say, oh, that really sucks, are the people who are just yelling and hollering and advancing their views and not being open to listening to what other people seem to be saying or other views. If there is another view, it's just a wrong view. And I kind of go, well, I can engage in that. But then what I would be doing is creating a fandom that isn't fun for me and isn't rewarding for me. And so we are creating what we get. And when I look at Corfu, we have created a number of things. So what's unique? There are a few other conventions that have single track program, but Corfu has basically always had a single track program as far as I know. Not the first one, I wasn't at the first two. So I'll stop going. Yeah.
Four different things.
Okay.
I'm gonna slide the suit. Want you to have it? You have to watch it.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap up this from last word, each of them. And what? And the questions is simply, does fandom say? Nothing else. Does it or doesn't? No.
Linda, I do miss some of the things you mentioned. I really do. I do not miss 12 of us in 2 rooms at JR. I really don't.
I was going to say, no, fandom doesn't suck. Certainly it's fragmented. You can find, as you mentioned earlier, you can find many conventions, big ones. I too miss those days. I mean, back in the old days, we all had great Colin Nelson stories. I have a great Colin Nelson story. Are those being generated today? I don't know. I miss those times myself. But I think that good times can still be had in conventions like this. So no, it doesn't suck.
So now AA fandom doesn't suck, but I think some other fandoms might suck.
And I don't miss accidentally drinking these contact lenses because I was in 50 classes with that. And no, fandom does not suck. At least we don't.
Well, thank you, everybody, for listening fairly politely. Now and then, time, sorry. Tommy's going to pull the switch or push the switch or do something very nice. See you very soon. Thank you.